The Tim Heale Podcasts. Ordinary people's extraordinary stories.
Welcome to the Tim Heale Podcast. In this episode, I'm going to have a chat with Corey. Corey's going to tell me where and when he was born. Then he's going to describe what it was like where he grew up, the schools he went to, and the education he received. All right, Corey, over to you.
Hey, Tim. Thanks so much for having me on your podcast to start with. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today. My name is Corey Hilton. I am originally from a I should say a municipality outside of Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, by the name of Surrey. I guess you could say, a rough and tumble area to a certain degree where I grew up in the first place. And I'll be straightforward. My education was really limited more so to an academic level, just coming out of high school. I was more focused on other things outside of my, I guess you could say, education at that time. But at the same time, I had a very unorthodox upbringing, going into a very colorful and interesting industry at a very young age. So I will admit it did somewhat hamper my education level to a certain degree, but brought me into a different type of world that most people don't get into. So, yeah, my family background was very, very original as well, because back in the 70s when I was born, there was a lot more intergenerational, I guess you could say, adoption. And so for myself, I was adopted by my grandparents, raised by more of an old school type of environment, I guess you could say. And so through that, I was very supported by my grandparents that raised me and loved by my grandparents that raised me. But there was also an element of emotional disconnection that was there. And that was part of my hindrance to a certain degree with certain things in my life, but also at the same time, I leveraged other things that they taught me, such as morality and integrity, to get me through a lot of situations when I was maybe at, well, there was times when I was on top of the world, and there was times that I was actually at rock bottom. So to be very straightforward, I was in a very unique industry that most people don't understand fully, but I try my best, or I tried my best to represent it with class, and that was why I was able to sustain an industry, or I should say, a career for 25 years in the male exotic dance industry throughout Canada and the United States. So that's kind of a simple rundown, Tim. I hope I was able to really kind of answer your questions there to a certain degree, I guess. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
pretty straightforward. I lived in a very similar environment to what anybody else would live in, but I just went on a different path, I guess you could say, with my life that brought me into a lot of adventures most people want to know about, but maybe they don't want to do the job, but they want to know what it was like a little
Well, anyway, let's just have a quick look back at the town you grew up in. What type of town was it? I mean,
bit. Yeah, well,
it's in
Surrey was
Vancouver. That's the sort of northern part of
Well,
Canada.
no, actually, Vancouver's actually more so to the western side, the western coast of Canada. So, Port City, obviously, and with that being said, very beautiful city. It's in fact, I've traveled quite a bit throughout the world to Asia and multiple, even Europe myself, and it is definitely a unique type of environment there, as far as very multicultural. When it comes down to it, like I said, just beautiful. You have the mountains, you have the ocean, you have everything you want, really. I just lived, quite frankly, on the outskirts of that area. So,
Hmm.
being that it was kind of a municipality, so to speak, of Vancouver, it was just an area that was kind of a middle class upbringing. If you want to know the truth, we just had the. I never had a problem with having food on the plate, so to speak, but at the same time, it wasn't like we were eating steak and lobster every night. Let's just put it that way.
So what was the school like? I mean, you mentioned multiculturalism. I mean, was it like that back then? Was it the what do they call them now? Native Canadians or Native Americans
Oh,
in the
yeah.
school,
Well, I mean,
or was it a different ethnic background?
Well, I would say that it actually started off when I was really young. I would say that it was kind of more so, it was generally just Caucasian people that were at my school when I was really young. And then really gradually I saw an integration of all sorts of different cultures, everything from Asian to East Indian people to First Nations people. And really it was kind of a gradual, I guess you could say, integration of these different cultures into my
Mm,
schooling. So when it came down to it, I really, didn't really see a lot of conflict or anything like that through my upbringing when it came to that. I, in fact, really didn't really look at the different cultures as any different than I was in a lot of ways. I mean, there was cultural differences, the way that maybe their families operated or whatnot. But as far as the way that I saw people eye to eye when I was in school, it was the same eyes as if you know, they were the same race as me. I didn't really look at it in that way at all. We
Yeah.
didn't really tend to have a whole lot of conflict or anything like that. It was just really the area that I grew up in, Tim, was more so kind of like I said, uh, I guess you could say a lot of little thug kids at times trying to kind of figure out their way and trying to be accepted in their own ways and doing things like stealing and stuff or whatever to try to fit in. And I got caught up in some of that stuff myself when I was in eighth or ninth grade, and trying to do. I in fact wrote that in part of my book where I was trying to steal out of a little grocery store across the street from my school, and got caught with a bunch of ice cream bars inside my jacket, and got called upstairs into this little store, and they ended up having to call my father. And my father, he showed up and basically asked me if I did it, and I said, oh, I did. And then I gave him some lame excuse as to why I did it, and then he turned around and said, okay. And he used reverse psychology on me and basically said, well, you know the value in being telling the truth, and I know that you realize that. So if you're telling me the truth here, Corey, then I believe you. And he just went silent and left it at that and didn't punish me for it. And the worst punishment that he could have done was that, because then I mentally excuse me, I mentally held on to that for weeks and felt so guilty that it was worse. It was probably worse than if he had taken a strap and slapped me across the butt with it. So, lesson learned, and I never stole again. But acceptance, when you're that age, you'll do some silly things to get to fit in. And I learned that lesson early and didn't go back to that. But yeah, I mean, ironically, like I say, you're trying to for whatever reason, I was trying to fit in with that crowd at that time. I don't know why, because they were in a lot of ways going nowhere to start with, and it was just
Yeah.
trying to be popular, I guess. And that was all that was. But my popularity, I found, was more. I found more popularity from working on my exterior and going into the gym and changing what I could control myself and bettering myself. And then I had a lot of people follow behind me instead of following other people, I guess you could say. And I influence people in the right way, to be a better version of themselves. And I still try to do that right to this day, actually. At 51 years
Mm.
old, I still try to lead by example and gently guide people in the right direction without telling them what to do. So, yeah, that's kind of an outline of what Surrey was like back at that time.
Mhm. So you said about going to the gym. So when did you start getting into that? What got you into that? Was it like Charles Atlas at the time? I mean,
Yeah.
uh,
Charles Atlas.
and what's the other
That's a
guy?
name,
I
Charles
mean,
Atlas. My
Arnold Schwarzenegger, that sort of thing. Was he around about that time?
Yeah, I met Arnold one time actually when he was in his pumping iron phase, well before he was in the movies and all that. So I actually got to meet Arnold when he was just strictly a bodybuilder back in that time, and nobody really even knew of him. But I will say that yes, those influences were there, Tim. I mean, Charles Atlas, I laugh about that a little bit because that's a little bit before my time. But I will say that I do I did very much look up to a lot of those bodybuilders at that time. I think for me, it was more so that I was not really happy with the person that I looked at in the mirror externally. I just didn't really feel that I was living up to what I could. And when it came down to it, just like a lot of other young men out there, you're wanting to impress some girl or whatever it was, and the only
Mm.
chance you're going to have, in my eyes, that I had was is to be able to, like I said, control what I could and build my body. So I spent a year in a friend's carport training and working out, and trying to avoid being bullied in school because I was having that problem as well. And that was a way that I could avoid being bullied, right? And so when
Yeah.
I built myself up, and that carried through even into my 20s and everything else. When I built myself up, I didn't have a problem with other people really picking at me too much because they figured that I would flatten them. So that was something that when it came down to it, I worked really hard on to not only just build myself to look better, but then when it came down to it, joined another gym after I spent that year in my friend's carport, and was able to really, at the age of 17 years old, while I was still in high school, I ironically got asked from one of my friends that I was working out with, who was a couple of years older than I was. He asked me if I wanted to come down to the nightclub that he worked at. And of course, here in Canada, the drinking age is 19, and I was 17 years old. And he just said, "Yeah, come on down, throw a university shirt on, and come see me, and I'll let you through the door." So I did that, and then all of a sudden, that first step that I took into that nightclub at 17 years old, I had no idea that I was actually taking the first step into an industry that I would spend 25 years doing. But that was the first stage of it where I got introduced to the manager of the nightclub. He said to me, he said, "Oh, you're going to school," because he saw my university shirt I was wearing. And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, do you need some extra income?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm a starving student." And he said, "Well, take your shirt off." And I took my shirt off, and he said, "You're hired." And I said, "Hired for what?" And he just said, "Well, if you be here on Tuesday evenings and Thursday evenings, and you work from this time on out till about 11:30, and you serve drinks and to the ladies at ladies night, and you make 15% of everything that you sell, and you get all your tips." And I was looking at it as a 17-year-old kid, like, this is my dream. So I took it, and then I worked Tuesdays and Thursdays for quite some time, even while I was going to high school. And my parents were actually, quite frankly, okay with it. They just said, as long as you keep your grades up and you don't get messed up with drugs or anything, then fill your boots, have a good time, and make yourself some money. And so that's exactly what I did. And just that was where it started, Tim, and then it just kind of went from
Okay.
there, and it's
Just
crazy,
built up from
crazy
that
story that I
stage.
wrote.
Yeah.
Yeah, so definitely an interesting run that I had with the whole bodybuilding thing. But I really, what it came down to was it was just more so that I found acceptance through bodybuilding, and found acceptance for myself through the discipline that I had to do it. And I did
Mm.
something that most people in this world don't do, and that is I spent 5 years training and bulking up to go to the point of being on stage and being in competition, and dieted down for that, and carried it through and did a show. And it was one of the most amazing experiences and fulfilling experiences of my life. But at the same time, that also helped me to go into a career that was all focused again on perfection and focused on competition. And it's all I knew for so many years, that I focused on my exterior, that I didn't really work a lot on my interior until this last few years. And that was a whole
Mm.
other awakening that I'm really glad that I was able to do, because it made me a far more fulfilled person. And I'm able to connect now a lot more with relationships than I ever was before, because like I said,
Yeah.
I worked on those things. So
Kind of ready for it now then. So just
yeah, I
just
mean,
looking
nobody's
back
perfect.
just looking back at that time, uh, you said that you was kind of getting bullied. I mean, I had a similar problem. I, there was this bully in our class. I mean, I was actually in junior school, and this bully started on me, and I went for some advice to my old man, and he said, "Well, the best thing you can do, son, is when he starts, give him a thump, and make sure it's a good one, because you're going to get an hiding. But if you thump him hard enough, he will leave you alone." So anyway, the next time he started on me, I thumped him. He went flying backwards into the school pond. That's all anybody saw was me thump him, and he go in the pond. The next thing I know, I'm up the headmaster's office getting a cane. Oh, I thought, that's a real injustice, isn't it? Anyway, he never picked on me again, and neither did anybody else through my schooling. So I was quite
Yeah,
happy with that.
it's sort of fight or flight, right? Like, you get to that
Yeah,
point where and I was just, when that bully got to me when it first happened, he was actually somebody that I grew up with. He was actually a friend of mine that was, like, very close to me as a kid, and that's what really hurt the most, was that I trusted him and I actually liked him as a person, and he was just trying to fit in. And by doing that to me, it was the first person that I ever had actually that stepped on me to get what they wanted and used me for
mm,
that purpose. And so when I backed down to him in that moment, my pride sunk. My Everything that I had inside of me, I felt like I felt so low that because I couldn't
mm,
really do anything back, because he had a bunch of friends standing behind him. So typical bully stuff. But again,
yeah,
the only thing that I could control was to build myself. And so I did that. And then when that particular kid came to the school that I decided to go to avoid him, because I went to a different school for a year, he ended up coming to that school. And I had my own sense of revenge on him at that time as well, Tim. Like I wasn't maybe the same story as you, but at the same time, like I put that guy through some hell there for a little bit, to the point that his own father had to come to me to say, "Hey, can you lay off of him because it's affecting his grades?" And I said that was when it all ended. And
Mm.
I just eventually, in the end, to be completely honest, I didn't want to carry that negativity. And when we got to be a little bit older, we actually ended up meeting face to face, and we had a very civil and very good conversation. And he's still a friend of mine now. I have respect for him now, and vice versa. And it's just that silly, stupid stuff you do when you're kids and stuff. And there's a
Yeah,
lot of that happens, and you just got to drop it and move on with your life, right? But it was kind of the thing that spurred me in a lot of ways to not to stand up for myself, and to not allow those things to penetrate into my life and affect me forever. But if I had held on to that negativity, it probably would still be affecting me, and I just chose not to do that, right? Forgiveness can be, you don't have to agree with somebody or agree with their actions, but you can forgive them for their actions, and that's what I was able to do in that
yeah.
situation.
I mean, that's that. I mean, that's just sorting things out, grown up wise, when you can. I mean, lots and lots of people never ever get to bury the hatchet um, uh, on what they did when they were in school. And I have a funny recollection there, actually. It's about 25 years after I'd left school. I was kind of still in the army at the time, and doing some special stuff. And I just got this invite from the from a sort of a gang of people that were going to have a year reunion. I mean, a 74 class reunion. And I got invited along to it at 25 years. And yeah, I bumped into some people there that, yeah, it was a really strange evening. I could tell you.
I agree. I've been where you were at with that one. I've gone to my
It's,
reunions as well, and it's oddly
it's,
enough, I mean, we live in a comparison world as it is when you get on social media. But boy, oh
mm,
boy, you want to talk about comparison when you go to a reunion. Everybody's kind of
yeah.
wondering everybody always kind of wants to know what their classmates are going to turn out like, or who they're going to be in the future. And I don't think anybody that I was classmates with would have figured that I would have ended up taking the road that I did. But
Yeah.
I will say one thing on that is that I admire a lot of them, because a lot of people had, the families, they had the wife, the kids, the white picket fence, the dog, the cat, all those things.
Mm,
And for a while, I did have those things as well. But the one thing that I can say that I came back with at this age was is that I have a lot more stories and a lot more relationship experiences, and some, created a lot of memories that a lot of people, quite frankly, just never will, because I had such a free bird lifestyle. And,
yeah.
that's why I was able to write this insane book that has 100,000 words and 316 pages, because there was so much to tell, and I had so many people saying the same thing to me over and over again. You've told me this crazy story, you really should write a book. And I sat there and said I should write a book, just like so many people do for so long. But for me, I could have wrote this book, quite frankly, 10 years ago,
Mm,
just based off of the stories. But my mission wouldn't have been complete if I had have done that. I had a lot of learning to still do, and I really wanted to make an impact above and beyond just stories. I want to really be able to help out men in particular over 30 years old that struggle with lack, or they struggle with self-doubt, unworthiness, really disconnecting with their partners. Maybe they're communicating, but they're not truly connecting with their partners. These are all just simply things that I'm talking to in my 30-year-old self, the things that I actually,
mm,
frankly, did all those things. And I just want to help other guys out, really, to be able to avoid those pitfalls, not to have to fall into the same things that I did. Because I had to take a lot of long walks to figure a lot of this stuff out, and I'd rather really help out some other people not to take those long walks, if you want to know the truth. So
yeah.
that has a lot to do with the learning experiences in my book are based off my core values and the struggles that I had with them, and how I'm now aligned with my authenticity. But I know I wasn't always aligned with my authenticity,
Mm,
and I feel that is a massively important thing to understand as you get older. And I think that you get wisdom as you get older. When you find that you align with those things, you're really the best version of yourself that you can be. Not perfection, but you're the best
yeah.
version of yourself you can be.
I don't think we'll ever get to perfection.
Yeah,
But
it's not even
I'll
on the scale.
I'll tell you the one thing that I found with the old reunion malarkey is that when when you look into that old face, And right behind it, you see the young one that you was looking at, sort of the 25 years beforehand. I think that's the weirdest thing. And then you'll pick up on a conversation that you actually were having back at that time. And I just found that so bizarre.
I agree, and I also find that you also like you're almost assuming that this person that they are the same as they were when you last spoke to them 20 years ago. But
Yeah,
then as the conversation carries on, you come to some distinct realizations that that person's changed a lot and so have you. You know,
yeah.
and so even for myself through my marriage, right? Like I was married for 7.5 years basically, and I came to a realization that there was an element of that where she changed and so did I. And
Mm.
that's just life. Like I think that people grow and they change at different paces and they change and they go in different directions, and that's why I just feel myself personally, I feel that it's just so important when I'm coaching people with authenticity. I always try to really make sure that when they're talking when they're talking to their partners, whether it's business or personal, I feel that it's really important to understand that it is always work and that there's an element of really trying to be honest and real with one another and take that time, whether it's every month or every few months, schedule it and sit down and say, okay, where are we at? Let's have an honest conversation. Are we going in a good direction? Are we going in a bad direction? If we're going in a bad direction, let's be honest and say what that is and how we can actually make that work to our advantage, not mine or yours, but ours. And really, when it comes down to it, if it's going in a good direction, how can it even be better? Like always, let's work on that. And I just think that is my this is just my personal perspective, but I didn't do
Mm.
that myself, and it really showed in the end because my ex ended up straying in a completely different direction, and I myself did as well, and I changed without even, quite frankly, even realizing it because we all grow, we all change,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, and we're not
Mm.
perfect, not perfect by
No.
any means. I'm far more into progression.
Anyway, I think what we've done is we've sort of leapt ahead quite a long way.
Yeah,
So
I
what I
bounce
want
around
to
a
do
bit. Sorry
now
about that.
is just reel you in a little bit, and let's take you back. So during your high school, not college, high school, you were doing this little job down the bar where you shouldn't have been, and so you're walking around with like a little trolley dolly with your drinks tray and then
Yep.
what were you wearing?
Yeah, it was that's funny you asked that. I actually Tuesday nights were what they called Hawaiian ladies' nights. So you actually had the lei around your neck, and we had shorts on, and they were usually colorful Bermuda style shorts or whatever back in the '80s, and
Well,
yeah, it was pretty casual, you know.
the
I'm
big
sorry.
baggy
Yeah,
ones,
yeah, and then
or the
the
skin tight
casual
fit
flip.
ones.
Yeah, just like you would be if you were going to the beach, right? And that was pretty much what it was, and it was kind of this really casual vibe on on a Tuesday night there, and it was fun. And like I said, I would serve shooters or serve drinks to the girls and collect my tips, and yeah, and then at the end of the night, what we would do is after the male dancers, the guys that were actually out there doing their full
Mm.
shows, they would finish their acts, and then we would go out and we'd hand out a bottle of champagne to the loudest table in the house that was screaming the loudest, which was a lot of fun. And we'd do a little choreographed dance routine for them, and it was just a really good time. And it was the number one ladies' night in British Columbia, Canada at the time. And there was an area on the other side of the club that was for the men, and they had female dancers on that side, while they had male dancers on the other side for the ladies. And it was just a really, really, really fun environment, and it was very politically incorrect at that time, so to speak. And it was a foregone industry that really just isn't, like I said, it's not really even existing anymore, but it was a good time. And then on the Thursday night, they changed it over to more of a, I guess you could say, cuffs and collars, bow tie, dress pants, black dress pants, and just, the typical stripper type of look, I guess you could say. And it was a little more upscale.
Mm.
So that was just kind of the way that they had it set up, and it was really successful, Tim, for a lot of years. And it ended up, not only did I do that, but actually I worked those Tuesdays and Thursdays. But then when I got into my 12th year of high school, or my 12th grade of high school, my last year, they actually hired me on to work the door and actually start IDing people as a bouncer at the door, which I found was very ironic because I was actually 18 years old and I was underage asking people for their ID to let them in the club. And I had a police officer literally standing next to me and he'd be asking me how my night's going and we'd be chatting about the coffee that we were drinking. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, I'm illegal as all get up right now doing this, but whatever. And I just went along with it and never ended up having any backlash from it at all. In fact, the funny thing is when I actually had my true 19th birthday, I had to pretend it was my 21st birthday when I was at the club to make everybody think that I was that age because I didn't want to let the cat out of the bag. So yeah, that was just kind of the way that it was when I was at that time. But also you have to also realize that I was put into an environment, a very adult environment that realistically there was a lot of people, there were a lot of influences in that environment that brought me into the whole other realm of this industry where I got introduced to the best of the best male dancers in all of Canada, and one of the Elvis of stripping at that time was my mentor, and he actually helped me and said, "Hey, Corey, you can do what I do." And I looked at him and I said, "No, there's no way I could ever do that. There's just no way." And
Mm.
he said, "Oh no, you can." And I'll tell you what, Tim, within 3 weeks, we had a name put together, we had an act put together, and I was out there doing exactly what those guys were doing. And that was when my career started to launch, and I started touring around and went across Canada, and I won
Mm.
Mr. Nude Western Canada back in 1997 and ended up Mr. Nude. I actually was second in Mr. Nude Canada. They actually had contests back then for that. And
Grief.
yeah, it was really cool. Just a really amazing
Mm.
experience. I have no regrets, really. I mean, I have really no regrets about my past career. In fact, I'm very proud of my accomplishments that I had over that time. So yeah, it was really
I mean,
cool.
would you get away with it now
Would I get
with this
away with
woke
it
society
now?
that we've got?
It's just different, Tim. We're not in the
Mm.
same type of society. There's no the majority of stuff, not necessarily that I would get away with, because like I said originally here, I carried myself with class with this stuff, and I really treated people with respect. But I can't say that for a lot of the dancers that I worked with over the years.
Mm.
And again, there's a lot of things that when you look back at even maybe rock bands or people that are in the entertainment industry that were doing some of the things they were doing in the 80s and 90s, those things are not acceptable in this generation right now.
Mm.
Like it's so much more politically correct now, so to speak, that people's heads would pop off knowing some of the stuff that we were doing back in that era. And so it's just the reality. And I don't speak in my book through political or religious ideology in any way whatsoever. I'm just when I'm talking, I'm talking to my audience in a way that they're just looking at it through my eyes. They're just seeing what I
Mm.
saw, and I can't change that, and I'm not about to, because it is the truth. And so,
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
it was very interesting process going back at my age and trying to timeline these things and trying to
Mm.
attach certain ages to certain things and actions, or I should say moments, events that happen. Just as a slight example, I'll give you. I mean, when I was trying to go back and write this biography, I was having to find out, okay, well, where was I when 9/11 happened? Where was I when Hurricane Katrina happened? And these are all times when I was in the United States. So, and then I had to figure out, okay, who was in my life at that time?
Mm.
What was I doing as a job or whatever, right? And I had to go back, and that
Yeah.
was a very hard process to do. It was not easy,
Mm.
but it took a lot of time. But um, again, I'm bouncing
So,
around a little
so you mentioned
bit.
9/11. You mentioned 9/11. Where were you on 9/11?
Good question. I was actually in a little town called Warner Robins, Georgia. Um, it was just south of Macon, Georgia, southeastern United States. At that time, I was actually it was crazy. I'd been working in Florida for a few years now. We are definitely jumping ahead here, but I'd been working in Florida for a little while at the largest beach club in North America at the time, and then I had left my group there, and me and my ex-wife, we had moved to Georgia, and believe it or not, at the time, I was very irresponsible, didn't have my act together at all, and I did not have a social security number in the US, so I was not legal to be working there, and I'd been there for quite some time. So I only had so many options at that time because I was living off of tips and money that I made from dancing. There was only so many options, and one of them was to go into the construction industry. So I actually went into being a ceramic tile and stone mason, and I'd never worked so hard in my entire life. I had no help. I went out there and did all these jobs, and when 9/11 happened, I was actually working for a company in this town called Warner Robins, and I was literally loading up my tour van or my van to go out and to go do a project at that on that morning. And I was in the warehouse when I heard it on the radio, and then I ran inside and saw the second plane hit live. So but for me
Mm,
in that moment, actually, it was very, very scary because I was literally standing right um, across from the largest Air Force base in the US, or one of them, called Warner Robins Air Force Base. And the entire base was shut down. And there was even a black cloud over the base because they were doing testing that morning. So, me as a Canadian sitting there, I was just in total shock and fear, thinking that, oh my God, is the US under attack? What's happening here? Right. And it was under attack in just a different way in that moment. So, yeah, it was just one of those memories that kind of burned into everybody's mind as far as where they were in that moment. But yeah, for me, it was just, I guess you could say I went home and I held my loved ones a little bit closer that morning. I will say that, but
mm,
it was, yeah, it was a very unique experience, I guess. I saw, as a Canadian, I saw quite a change in the culture, especially in the southern United States. Before, I could tell a difference before 9/11 and a difference after 9/11 as far as the way people tolerated certain things, and the division in a lot of ways started to
mm,
be a lot more strong. It was a lot more black or white and not so much gray area the way that people would discuss things. It was very, I'm right, you're wrong, this is the way it is. And I've seen that. I kind of felt, just from my own experience anyways, or my own perception, that that has escalated ever since that day. I feel like it's just ever since 9/11, it's kind of built up more and more and more, to the point that now it's almost ridiculous how much people are so tribal. And it's, in a
mm.
lot of ways, I find it a little bit sad, because I always try my best as an authenticity leader to really understand and respect other people's perceptions, and try my best to not necessarily agree with what they have to say, but maybe get into their head a little bit to understand why they feel the way that they do. And
Yeah,
it's okay to disagree, but it's also okay, if I'm going to respect that person's perception, all I ask is that they respect mine as well, because they just see life through their lens. That's all.
yeah.
That's the way I see it. It's not that they're wrong.
Well, I was in Macedonia when 9/11 happened. We were
Mm,
on Operation Task Force Harvest. We were doing a
okay.
weapons collection of the National Liberation Army in Macedonia, collecting weapons off of them. And
Hmm.
we we'd just gone down to the American base, which is called Camp Able Sentry,
Hmm.
and we had another name for it. Can you imagine that? And I was sat in the car just listening to the radio. And a couple of guys had gone into the PX to do some shopping, and
Hmm.
I heard it on the radio. So I shot in, grabbed the guys. We shot back down to our camp. We went into the ops room, and they got a big
Hmm.
TV up on the screen, and it was a big ops room for the whole operation. And we saw the
Hmm.
second plane go into the twin towers, and there were some Americans that were working with us, and it was scary what they were coming out with. Really scary. They wanted to go and nuke the rest of the world at that time. And I mean,
Yeah.
we moved on from there, but I mean, 5 months later, I found myself in Kabul.
Yeah. I mean, I find that, in a weird way, like, this was a reality that my own grandfather dealt with on a daily basis when he was in World War II, right? And that was kind of the way I kind
Yeah.
of felt about it when that moment happened. It was that same sort of, that was what kind of ran through my mind, was that little moment that I had of fear when I saw that second plane hit, or that moment I had of fear when I looked out that door and saw what was going on across the road. That was just one moment in my life that I felt like that. But for him, he spent years in that work, and he was fought in the North Atlantic in World War II. So, he
Mm.
was. he was right out there, and when
Yeah, that
there
was
was
tough doing the
torpedoes
convoys,
coming at
that's for
his
sure.
boat.
Mm.
Different life, the
Yeah,
life that
absolutely.
will I'll never comprehend what he went through, but I also saw the side effects of what he went through, being wired for the military and, almost robotic in his ways because he wasn't allowed to be able to express emotion, right? And then when you're somebody that's also been raised in a depression era where your own parents had their own issues, and for my grandfather, unfortunately for him, his mother committed suicide at a very young age, and so there was obviously mental health there based off of what was their circumstance at that time. And so, but when you don't deal with those mental health traumas and you just bottle them up and you just hold on to all those emotions and never let them out, well, guess what ends up happening? It cascades down through your entire family and affects everyone
Yeah.
else in the process. And so for me, it took a lot of, even as a grandson, as somebody that was that far away from that generation, I really had to do a lot of work on myself. I really had to really dig deep to figure out a lot of these things and break that cycle so that, and I don't have kids, but I wanted really badly to break that cycle so that I could connect with people.
Mm.
And, when it came down to personal and professional relationships, because again, Tim, when you don't and you sit there and say, okay, well, I'm bottling up all this stuff and it's them that's wrong. It's not me that's wrong. It's the other person. It's always somebody else. I was pointing the finger at everyone else all my life and not actually using my own thumb and saying, I need to be accountable for this. And
Yeah.
admittedly, I did that for a long time. But I'll tell you, since I started using my thumb and I started figuring out what my part was in the process, it's been very, very liberating, and it's taken a layer off of me that I didn't dream. When I took those layers off, it actually allowed me to heal relationships that I had from my past that I thought could never be healed. And that's part of why I named my book "Take It Off," because it's not just about
Mm.
taking my clothes off as a male exotic dancer, but it's taking those layers off that life has put upon me, whether it's from my family or whatever, just removing those layers so I can be the best version that I can be of me. Not perfect, but just progression.
Mm.
Progression. Right.
So,
So
so what was the catalyst that set you off on that road? What was the
mm,
what was there a one specific incident that
yeah.
got you to look at yourself?
Yeah. Yeah. The needle mover was for me was more um you see, like I said before, like I'd always had people saying, oh, you need to write a book. But for me, the stories that I had inside my book, I quite frankly didn't really want my grandparents, or my parents, I should say. I didn't want my folks to read or hear some of those stories because of their generation. If you want to know the truth, they probably just wouldn't have understood. And I just didn't really want that image of, I personally just didn't want the image that they had of me, of that little kid that they raised. I didn't want that image to be tarnished. I wanted them to be able to know that they did the right thing, and they actually did do a good job raising me, and they did.
Mm.
And they were
Yeah.
proud of me even though they didn't necessarily express it. But for me personally, I just didn't want that to happen. So when my I chose and I waited and I said when both my folks were passed away was when I was going to truly get down to business and do this. And so that was what happened roughly 2 years ago when my grandfather passed away, or when my father passed away, I should say. That allowed me in my own way to detach, and I actually took time off of. I broke up with my girlfriend at the time. I broke up with my career at the time. I detached from everything, and of course, COVID was part of the equation because the world did kind of change at that point. But I chose in that time to do some very deep introspection at that time. And through that process, that's when I came to enhance my writing ability, where I was able to take the chapters that I'd written in my book already, because I had already wrote it. I wrote all the stories. They were really
Mm.
from journaling. I was able to take those chapters, attach a core value that I had to that story, and then literally show the struggle that I had with that core value and the emotional feeling that I had to that core value as well. So, as just as an example, like I have my first chapter has a lot to do with the struggle between truth and perception. So, as a little kid, I perceived this one time when my aunt and uncle took me to the fair and put me on a Ferris wheel. I perceived that to be a very traumatizing event. I was on this Ferris wheel. I got stuck at the top. I was all by myself. The thing was creaking. The wind was blowing. I was crying my eyes out. It was the worst trauma, and it was just so horrible. And I carried this fear of heights for most of my adult life because it was just so brutal. And then I came to find out years and years later, after I'd spoken to my aunt about it, I said, Aunt Carol, how could you and my uncle have ever put, how could you put a 5-year-old kid on this Ferris wheel at that age? It scared the daylights out of me. And she turned around and said, Corey, it wasn't a Ferris wheel at the fair. We were at the mall. I put a quarter in the thing. You were no higher than 7 feet in the air. You were just sitting at the top of the thing, crying your eyes out like a little baby. And I was like, okay, now it all makes sense. But the perception that I had of the truth held me back from so many
Mm,
things in my life, right? From just that one little childhood trauma. So that's just an example of one chapter. And then I have other ones where it's like I realized that when I started to detach from one of my other core values being creativity, well, one of my biggest things with creativity, I feel excited when I'm creative, whether it be painting something or whatever it is. If I'm creative, it's part of my life that feeds excitement. And when I'm not creative, and that excitement dies, part of me dies as well. So I acknowledge that and realize that about myself and try to make sure that I keep that creative side of me going so I'm excited. And that was part of my degradation with my own marriage, was that I didn't have that creativity anymore, and that exciting part of our relationship died. And guess what, part of our relationship died with that too. So I can't
mm,
how can I point the finger completely at someone else and say it's all your fault, when I had to acknowledge these things inside of myself and come to that awareness to understand, so that the next time I decide to go into a personal or professional relationship, I'm going in with emotional intelligence, where I'm actually going in and saying, okay, well, this
mm.
is where my strengths are, this is where my weak parts are, and be a real authentic leader and look for feedback from other people as far as my strengths and weaknesses too, not just live through my own perception. Because I think a lot of us do that. We just see things through
Yeah.
our eyes and we believe that that's what it is, and it's not necessarily what it is for everybody else out there.
Mm. Yeah, and they do say that to understand somebody, you have to walk a mile in their shoes. Um,
100%.
and,
Yeah.
and and people all over the world are different, and and
Sure.
this is something that I'm finding with my podcast, particularly, is I'm speaking to lots and lots of different people, and I'm
Hmm.
getting their stories, their perspective on life,
Hmm.
and people's backgrounds are totally different, and the effects that in individual incidents have had on those guys and girls. I mean, I've done some girls as well recently,
Hmm.
and yeah, it's getting inside somebody else's head and working out how they've gone through their life. So
Yeah.
and it's getting that recorded, and I think uh, that's probably one of the most important things is to get this history recorded forever, because otherwise it'll be lost. And that's why I do it, and I love doing it.
Hmm.
It's really, really given me some focus. I mean, I retired from the army in 2018. Um, Lockdown, the start of lockdown was pretty grim, I must admit.
Hmm.
And I was drinking an awful lot of spiced rum, far too much of it was good for me. And I was when I was sober, I was doing the old family history stuff, and that's what sparked it all. And here we are today, 2 years on, 120 episodes in, and
There you go.
I'm chatting with you, getting your
Yeah,
story,
and
which is fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
yeah,
I mean,
I love it. Love it.
so
I really do.
so did you actually ever get the social security number for America?
No, no, Tim. Actually, again, I've had a very, very, very crazy life. Like, we could honestly, my friend, we could probably do 5 or 6 episodes here. I'm not going to deny it. the because I've had other podcasters that are booking me for the second and third episode because there's just so much. But to answer your question, no, I never did get the social security number. What ended up happening, oh, this was heavy. But so I ended up, yes, I was a dancer, and yes, I ended up eventually just kind of strayed from it for a little bit when I was living in Florida. Now, that being said, I had some of my most amazing experiences when I was in Florida as a dancer. But when I actually decided to go into this construction industry for a while, I was very, very good at what I did. I took a lot of pride in it. I was actually like, I was very good at it. And so, believe it or not, even though I didn't have a social security number, I actually kind of somewhat had my own company. I had people contacting me all the time to want to do work for them. And even though it was under the table, I was still doing a lot of work. And I had this guy that I had ran into down there, and his name was Woody. And he was worth, right at that time, now we're talking about, it's almost 20 years ago now. Not quite 20, but anyway, he was worth around $43 million. He had multiple corporations across the US. He was in this very unique industry that he was able to really make a lot of money in. So he actually had said to me, he said, Corey, I love what you do. You've done such great work for me around here. And he said, you've helped out my friends. And he said, I really, really want to help you out. Now, this is just before the 2008 stock market crash. I'm like, wanted to keep
Mm.
this in mind. So he ends up saying to me, I'm going to go ahead and fund your company and we're going to start a flooring store. And he said, you'll never be in the red. He goes, unlike most companies, you don't even have to worry about the debt. If it doesn't work out, this is you and me. We're just going to go in with this thing, and wherever it ends up going, it ends up going. And I'm thinking to myself, my God, this is the perfect situation. The only problem is I need to have a social security number. There's no way I can do all this under the table. I have to be legal, right? There was no way of getting around it by then. So now keep in mind it had been 7 years or so, or a solid 7 years since I'd entered the US, and I'd been down there illegally for quite some time. So my passport and my driver's license had both gotten to the point where they were expired. I had to exchange my Canadian one when I was in Florida, and believe it or not, they exchanged it and gave me a Florida driver's license without asking any questions. But that got to the point of being expired. So I had no ID that was legitimate, and the only way I could get legitimate ID from what the people at Social Security said was I had to go back to Canada and get my passport and my driver's license reinstated. It was the only way I was going to be able to do it. And if I did that and I came back with it, they would go ahead and issue me a social security number, and away we would go. We'd go into business and it would be glory days. Let's have a good time and do this thing. So that's what I did. So I came back to Canada. I ended up having to take my driver's test over again. I we got my passport, but the passports at that time took 3 months to be able to be assigned. So I had to go fly all the way from Florida. I came to Canada, drove across the border with my biological mom. We got all that stuff done. Then I flew back to Florida, came back 3 months later to actually to pick up the passport, get the shiny new driver's license. I did all the things the right way. And it was at 5 o'clock in the morning at Vancouver airport. Me and my ex-wife were going to go back to Florida. I got money in my pocket. Everything's going good. Brand new IDs. I'm thinking, yep, let's go start this thing. And the guy at the border patrol, or the customs officer, he started asking me some questions that I couldn't answer. And when he started asking me those questions, and I hit that roadblock, he scribbled on that piece of paper and said, to the back. And that was when my dream ended. And I was sitting in this room being fingerprinted, and my ex-wife could go back to Florida, but I had to stay in Canada. And I was actually, in that moment, that was the end of my marriage, because when it came down to it, she ended up going back, and in the end, she ended up straying from me. And in the end, I didn't, I wasn't able to start that business, and I had to start my life over again and live here in Canada. And I was banned from the United States for 3 years, and I was not allowed to go back until I could prove my citizenship here in Canada, and that I had no intent to actually go and live illegally in the US again. But through that process, Tim, that was where I was stripped down naked in a completely different way. And so I lost
Mm.
everything that I had. I had a house down there. I had a car. I had the cat, the dog, the white picket fence. But I lost it all at 38 years old and had to start over with a bag over my shoulder in the snow here in the town that I live in right now. Um, but it was the worst and best thing that could have ever happened to me because I started with a clean slate and I started being accountable and I started being responsible and I rebuilt myself to a better version that I've ever been before. And although it was pure hell going through all of that at the time, now I'm allowed back in the States. And now I actually have a decent enough relationship with my ex-wife after not even speaking to her more than 3 times in 15 years. Because there was a lot of very, I guess you could say, hard things that we went through at that time. And again, I
Yeah.
passed off a lot of blame on her. But like I said, the story goes on and on but in the end, no, I did not ever get a social security number, but that's okay because
Mm.
when it came down to it, it all happened for a reason, I suppose. And now this is where I sit, and it's not a bad place to be. I'm actually thankful because that stock market crash that happened in 2008 would have absolutely devastated our business anyways, and we probably wouldn't have been able to make it through if you want to know the truth.
Yeah. So, bring us up to date. You're now living back in Canada, and what are you doing with your life? Are you still jumping
Yeah,
around on stage?
yeah, on a different stage. I retired at 43 years old from the male dance industry. Um, that was my last show was done here in Kelowna, Canada. Um, and I knew when it was the right time to hang it up. Let's just put it that way. I knew that that was the last one, and I made sure that was the last one. But in that time, again, I went through different careers. I went through some corporate careers, trying to go down some paths that um, were more so based on just getting by or just doing what I needed to do, and worked for a lot of other people and made a lot of other people a lot of money. Again, in this last 2 years, I started following my own path. I started following my own dream, decided to write this amazing book, using that more so as a launch pad. Now, that, like I said, the book's not just about stories, it has that personal development aspect to it. So, right now, right in the stage where I'm merging into coaching one-on-one and through video funnel coaching through my website to be able to not only sell books but package those books in a value package where I can really give a lot more back to my audience where they're going to take something from it. So I'm really, really proud of that. And I'm just really in the stage of continuing to build that and grow and add more value because if you want to know the truth, um, for myself anyway, um, I'm all in on this experience because I truly feel that this is my calling. And when it comes down to it, I've always had this sense of lack in the back of my own mind, and it's something that I guess, like I said, I passed that off before on maybe my upbringing, but I don't. The only way that I will not have lack in my mind, and this is something that I came to just to discover because I was in the Philippines for a month 2 years ago, and I was walking down the beach in Boracay, most beautiful beach I've ever been to in my entire life. And although I had a lot of money in my bank account, I still had that feeling of lack in the back of my head. I could never even truly enjoy one of my most amazing experiences because I still felt that it wasn't enough. I couldn't get that stability in my mind. It's almost like being a prisoner in your own head, thinking that you're going to be destitute someday because you're spending too much now or whatever it is. You have this weird. I just have always had this weird thing in there, and so my realization is that for myself personally, the only way that I'll ever truly eliminate that lack in my mind is to build my value up enough that you could take everything that you have away from me and it doesn't really matter because my value is that much to the world that I can always make it back. And that's what I'm
Mm.
literally trying to do right now with not only putting out an amazing book, but providing the type of value that does make an impact, that does help others to avoid the same struggles that I went through. And through that process, it is extremely gratifying because I know that the impact that others have had on me by helping them when I had my coach help me to align with my authenticity, I realized how much of a game changer that was for me. And I want to be that kind of a game changer for others, because when I look at my authenticity coach, she's somebody that's helped me she's through my publishing company, but she's changed things
Mm,
in my life so much that it's almost priceless. Like, it's something that I can't even put a number on, because it really has helped me release myself from that version of my former self that really was kind of riddled with all those things, like feeling unworthy, or feeling like that maybe I was a
mm,
follower instead of a leader at times in my life. Like, these are all just things that maybe other people's words that you wanted support from, they embed in your own mind. And so I had to really, again, like I said, through that introspection, figure out those things. But that all tied back into authenticity. It really did. It all ties back into my own values. And for most of my life, I didn't recognize those things. So I was kind of like throwing it out there and having a slot machine of life, like not really knowing what was going to come next, because I really just was kind of disorganized with all that. But now that I'm aware of all those things, now I can really show other people, okay,
mm.
tell me a little bit more about your core values, right? Yours are going to be different than
Yeah.
mine are. So you tell me about what yours are and what emotional feelings are attached to those core values. And then when you actually have all those emotional feelings that you put down on paper, maybe it's a good idea to actually figure out a word that all those emotional feelings represent. And my word is harmony. When all my emotional feelings are aligned and they're
Yeah.
really good, I'm in a harmonious state. So that's what I've been just trained to understand those things. So the more in line I am with those things, the better I am for myself and for the people that I'm associated with. So if I can, if more people lived by their authentic self, I think that more people would be liberated in this world and be okay
Mm,
with who they see in the mirror, right? Instead of
yeah.
so many people looking at what they see in the mirror and not being satisfied with it, and trying to compare themselves to so many other people and airbrushing themselves to be on social media to look good for the day, and putting up something that's not really them. And so that's what I'm trying to say here, Tim, is that I lived behind that mask of an
Yeah.
alter ego that I carried on stage for all those years. And this is the first time in my life that I've actually revealed Corey, the person behind the mask, not the person that was hiding behind it on that stage for so many years. So, and that's really gratifying. It really is. And
Mm.
scary at the same time. Not easy. It's scary.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I think we'll stop there. I think that has
Okay,
been
well, I'll just let you
terrific.
know too, just for your audience as well, just to know as far as and I'm going to give a little plug towards how to contact me for my book if
Yeah,
anybody is
absolutely.
interested in having a look at
And
it.
and I'll put it in the description box as well.
Oh yeah, sure. It's just it's all you have to go to is takeitoff.ca, because I'm in here in Canada. So
Yeah.
takeitoff.ca. That's where you can contact me. You can chat with me at any time. It's the best place to contact me. But yeah, thanks for the plug. I just wanted to
Brilliant.
add it in there so that people know where to get it anyway.
You're welcome.
The Tim Heale Podcasts. Ordinary people's extraordinary stories.